you. Mad at you. Tell you what's master. Coming at you. Coming at you. Rhyme style disaster. Coming at you. Mad at you. Tell you what's master. Coming at you.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside Wilfred Riley and Christy Kelly, and we are here talking with James Lindsay, author, mathematician. I think people forget about that one, right? Cultural critic, founder of New Discourses. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys.
So I wanted to talk about is it the elephant in the room or is the elephant and sickle in the room? What is this? The thing you have been getting yourself in hot water about, talking about the what you deem, you admit that it could be a better term, but what you call the woke right and how they're wreaking havoc out there. And you know, it would be interesting to hear from you because you're one of the loudest voices. But I know I kind of touch upon it. I see what you're talking about, and I'm kind of silent. I'm sitting back watching and making these, minimal comments. But we tangentially talk about it sometimes, when we were talking to Marianne Williamson, and other times it comes up. So it's good to have you in the seat to kind of guide me where I'm wrong, but to put a little more nuance and context around it. So I guess we should start by just having you quickly. I know you've done this many times, so you probably have it down to a formula and describe what the woke right is.
I wish I did have it down to a formula. It'd be a lot easier. No, I never know what so I get accused. They're like, James is changing the definition. It's like I'm trying to figure out what you people will understand. I've got, a few different ways I could characterize this. We go all into what does woke mean and this whole kind of technical philosophical discussion of that. And if we do that, the conclusion will be these people are definitely woke. We just don't know if they're right or not, as in right wing, because it seems like a very left phenomenon. But I'll just give you a little anecdote to warm up this kind of discussion of what it is or definition of what it is. So I was at an event recently, and one of the purveyors of what we might call this woke right for a bookmark came up to me, and there was a party, and he was a little bit inebriated, and he was running his mouth as one does. And he's like, why you got to call us woke right? And I was like, well, what would you rather I call you? He's like, why don't you just call us fascists? And I said, is that what you want to be called? He said, at least that sounds cool. And I said, that's why you're woke right, because it's not cool. So that kind of like the show's called Cut the Bull. I didn't mean to do that, but this kind of cuts through the BS immediately. And these guys, it's like the woke left, I think we all kind of finally agreed that they are neo-Marxists. We might fight about what the neo part means and how Marxist that makes them, but they're somehow some new version of Marxism. These guys are neo-fascists, and there's some new reaction to Marxism that's playing out in a similar way to the fascists, but not the same. It's not exactly the same as the old fascists, just like the neo-Marxists are not the same as the old communists. And so the simple kind of role that I give for people, like if I had the 10-second elevator pitch, what's the woke right? I say they're people who say they're on the right, that they say they're conservatives, that they push trad values, traditional values, but they act exactly like the left. So they're out there doing cancel culture. They're out there, playing the victim. Oh, people who look like me, we need to rise up with white power or whatever the hell it is. And they act exactly like the left. The bad arguments, the smear campaigns, the means
Racism.
justify the end. Was that you cutting the
I
bull
said
for me?
racism.
Racism. Well,
Because we
racism
know the
is,
left is racist. So,
well, it looks a lot to me like everybody's getting a little racist now. It's like, calm down, guys. Um, but yeah, so they're people that claim that they're working for the right. I mean, how sophisticated do you want to get? Some of them say it's time for us to embrace postmodern philosophy. Some of them say the right has always agreed with Karl Marx about his critique of liberalism and of capitalism. Some of them are saying, well, we have critical theory too. We can use critical theory. A lot of them, their scholars, are derived from critical theorists. For example, Paul Gottfried is one of their guys. And agree with Paul Gottfried or not, it doesn't change the fact that one of his advisors in university was Herbert Marcuse, who was the kind of arch neo-Marxist. And if you look over at Hans Hermann Hoppe, that's another one of their guys. Hans Hermann Hoppe was under Jürgen Habermas. who's a critical theorist. These are actual leftist critical theorists. And then you have these guys who kind of came down the pike further from it. You have Alasdair MacIntyre, who's kind of one of their philosophers. He was a communist. And then he decided, well, Marx didn't go far enough because he wanted to preserve modernity. So the real target's modernity. All the critiques apply. I mean, with some changes and so forth. He became a Catholic. His book's called After Virtue. So you have these guys who are all kind of downstream from leftist thinking. And so what I've been claiming, and then we get into more philosophical understanding, is that woke, a lot of people think, well, what's woke? And you hear Tucker Carlson come out on TV and say, it's, what does he say? He said it's gay race communism or something like that, right? Or LGBTQ race communism, I think, something to that effect. No, that's not it. That's leftist. For me, woke is an operating system. It's a way of seeing and interacting with the world, like that you woke up to a new view of reality. And these guys have adopted a woke up view to reality that the world's oppressing people like them, and we need postmodern and critical tools and Marxist type analysis to try to cut through to understand the world better. So there are people pushing right wing things with left wing means.
That makes sense. I think I want to go to Christy before you will, because I kind of know what you think. So, Christy, what did you think of his summation of woke right?
I mean, I think it's great. So honestly, I'm slow to use these type of terms because they can be alienating. So I'm probably the last one on the bus, or definitely this panel, to have adopted the term, woke right or woke in general in
You did be
referring
the
to
last one
people.
on this panel? I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, because
Okay.
I literally just used it yesterday, really for the first time as far as woke right, because they got on my last nerves with this Karen Bass thing. So immediately it's DEI hire. And I'm like, knock it off. Like, you guys are doing too much. How is she a DEI hire? So it has come to where anyone who is Black, anyone who is, transgender, female, gay, lesbian, who's in a position of power is all of a sudden got there because of DEI.
And
And
that's
so
not, and you're saying that's not true, just for clarification.
that's not always true.
I'm just messing with you.
Oh, see, I'm still riled up. I'm still riled
I
up.
see.
So
Okay.
the term woke right really cuts through
Mhm.
because it really determines it. First of all, it shuts them up or
Mhm.
it riles them up one way or the other. And then the ones that get way too riled up, you're like, aha, it's you. Like,
The hit
you're the
dog will
problem.
holler.
Exactly.
Right. So in a way, it's brilliant, but in a way, it's also kind of like it's outing, but it's also alienating, as you said earlier. So it may, cause a visceral reaction you wouldn't normally get. But it's new, so you're playing with the term.
But it's time. I think it's time to cause that reaction because it's gone too far.
And we'll get to that. Wilford Riley.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I agree with a lot of what Christy said. When you said, I think you know my opinion. Yeah, that's pretty much correct. I mean, my son James uses a slightly different definition, which I like and respect. But I mean, myself and Chris Rufo once broke down what, in my opinion, the three components of wokeness are. Like you now, Chris, for whatever reason, doesn't believe that there is a version of wokeness on the right, as I understand.
Oh,
I mean, he
okay.
described that as being like cold fire. I think it was pretty funny, but he's argued with a bunch of people, but he just doesn't believe it. I do. And people can disagree about this kind of stuff, but like basically to me, being woke is three things. Like you think that the world is somehow structured to oppress you. Not like there's 3% bias against black men or something, not things that are true, but like there's an infrastructure out there that's run by like the Jews or the saucer people, or you're now seeing the feminists that's designed to hold down your group, like working class men. And then you get into two like disparities between people or evidence of this. So if you have like the Karen Bass thing, Karen Bass was actually, I can't stand Karen Bass, but Karen
Right.
Bass is literally an elected official. Like she was voted in by the majority of the population. But any trend in representation that you don't like is evidence of this oppression of your group. And we'll probably get into this later, but we saw this recently with H-1Bs, where you saw a lot of
Mm,
fairly
mm.
high IQ, working class, middle class white guys saying, well, we're not being allowed to compete fairly for jobs with these Asians. And the question is, what does that mean exactly? Like, if you look at the percentage of hiring managers that are white or black native born Americans, can you prove that they're advantaging Asian guys over you? Or are there just higher test scores there? But point two is all disparities show discrimination. And point three is the solution is equity and social programs to remedy the effects of this oppression. That's a key element of all of this. And I think if you take those points 1 through 3 and you ask, are there people on the right that believe that? I mean, there clearly are. The level of anti-Semitism on Twitter, even as someone who's been involved in the white guy versus black guy debate or Westerners versus Indians or something, the level of hatred of Jews is just absolutely astonishing. Where I mean, people like Nick Fuentes, and I'm not like padding up my underwear right now or something. It's kind of gross. Like people are openly saying, like, there was a Michael Knowles the other day was talking about Catholic monarchs being willing to expel immigrants. Just a random fucking topic. And he said, well, Ferdinand and Isabella at one point expelled 5% of the population of Spain. And immediately Nick Fuentes and all these Groyper guys jumped into the thread and were like, yeah, it was the largest group he expelled. Why do you think he got rid of them? Because a lot of the people that were removed from Spain at this time were Jews. So there's this idea that Jewish people are the group that is running the world behind the scenes. The manosphere, the idea is that it's women to some extent. Like divorce law, I'm not a big fan of U.S. divorce law, but the idea that if your wife runs the home and you work, she gets 50% when you divorce, that's about 250 years old. This is now being called things like divorce rape. The system is set up to control men. Men can't get ahead. Men shouldn't marry. And I mean, Christy as a lawyer is aware of how bizarre a take that is, I think. Like that is another example. Anyway, I'm kind of going on here, but yes, there obviously are people that think the world is set up to control like middle class white men, males, whatever the group would be. Last thing, one point that one of you guys made, either Charles or Christy, is the question is, are these people on the right? That would be really the one challenge to the term. I mean, I think that if you actually sat down with someone like Jared Taylor, who I once debated, or Richard Spencer, the people that are at the furthest extremes of like the redistributionist white right, and you were to ask them, what would your ideal social community look like? It wouldn't be throne and altar capitalism. It would be basically communism, but for white
For
people
white
only.
people.
Yeah, like mass redistributionism. It would be something I would absolutely hate. Businessmen absolutely broke into the yoke. No Chinese, Jewish, so on market concentrations in the economy. It would just be huge subsidies, but to West Virginia, not Detroit.
All three of you were great. I think this is like many things, complicated to it's hard to put your finger on it because people have different definitions of it. They have varying degrees of it. They don't all manifest themselves the same way. And it matters, we'll get to this later, as you say, well, but it also matters who's doing it. And I think James has mentioned that before and used some examples. So, but I do want to poke at Christy because Christy said of the panel, she'd be the last one to use it. And I'm like over here, like, nope, because I've never done it. So I think that makes me last. But but like I said at the beginning, I said, well, I went to Will last because I kind of knew his views. Everyone kind of, including James, because we talked, kind of know what I think about it too. And it's like, all of you are right. I don't. I'm shocked that you said I didn't know Rufo. I'm shocked that you said he doesn't think it exists. The fact that it questioning whether it exists seems like shocking to me that anybody would question it. My questions are more like I have 2 to 3 questions. I would say, how prevalent is it? Right? I would say, was it destined? We'll start with this one, but was it destined to happen anyway? I think social media kind of exacerbated the problem as it was and accelerated the onset of it. But I think, and I would love to hear what you say about this, James, but I think the success of the people on the left is part of the cause of how people are reacting. Doesn't make it right, but there is some element of the people who believe and push the social justice narrative, critical social justice on the left, having control of the levers of power that would have somebody who was already inclined to think that way believe even further, greater, or find some sympathy in other groups of people saying, see, here's some examples of it. So I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened and people don't think that way. It's like racism was never going to go away. There were always going to be racist, but are people more comfortable being racist in certain scenarios? Of course. So I think that may be part of it too. So it's not to excuse it. And then I question like kind of how large it is, and as I say, how large it is as far as in sheer numbers, and Will and I had a back and forth in our conversation with Marion Williamson about that, saying that I don't really see it in the real world. That's why I was shocked about your story of the guy coming in. I don't mind you talking about us, but your label is wrong. Call us fascists. It's like I have some pretty red-blooded conservative follow all the political scenes, go to the events, go to Mar-a-Lago, all those kind of people. And they were like, I never heard. I was like, hey, I'm talking to Lindsay about this. It's pretty cool. They were like, what is woke right? I've never even heard of that. So I explained to them, I said, do you have anybody in your circle that as I describe it to you, that you're like, oh, I know somebody. It's like, no, not really. I got two crazy people I know, but nobody else. So it's kind of like, how much, so talk about that. Would it have happened, as fast, or would it be as bad, but for the woke left? The volume at which it's happening, and whether the people who believe this are close enough to the levels of control.
All right, I don't know how much tinfoil I need to put in my head to have this part of the conversation, but maybe some. Depends on how we want to come at this. But I'll just be so. Is it a reaction to the woke left? That's absolutely yes. Um, they're a mirror image, really, right? So the woke left has been out saying society's anti-black, so we got to have BLM and all kinds of black people getting allowed to go crazy because they're mad. And then you got the woke right saying, well, now the white people are being oppressed, so we got to be allowed to, take some licenses. I get told all the time with these guys, they say, well, these are just these are just white guys who are getting cheated in the workplace or whatever. Maybe that's the data bears it out, like Will was saying, maybe it doesn't. But they feel like they're being cheated, at least. They perceive being cheated in the workplace, and they're mad, so let them beat their chest. Right. And I'm like, well, we didn't accept that with BLM. I don't understand why we got to accept that with mad white people. Sure. And then, is there actually some discrimination happening? I would bet that there is. DEI policies. If you're positively discriminating against one group, you're negatively discriminating against the other ones by definition, because of one of these mathematical principles I'm supposed to remember is a mathematician pigeonhole principle or something. I don't know. Right. Law of the excluded middle. I don't know. Something like that. And so, are they getting discriminated against? Yeah, to some numbers somewhere. I mean, certainly we know that Asians and white guys were getting discriminated against for elite colleges. The Supreme Court already ruled on that and showed that it was a problem. And then the colleges responded by saying, yeah, let's do it. So am I supposed to accept that, okay, so there is this sort of discrimination regime, and therefore you're mad? Okay, I understand you being mad. Am I supposed to accept that now we have to kind of like rearrange our entire political system to accommodate you based on your skin color as a result of that? No, I don't really feel like I have to go there with you, right? So it's certainly a reaction to the woke left. And I think it's not just a bad reaction. I think it's exactly the same reaction that you see every time the left shows up and overacts in a society. I think it's the same mistake that was made in the 30s in Germany and across Europe, where you see the rise of under Franco in Spain. You see the rise of National Socialism under Hitler in Germany, most famously, obviously, and most probably consequentially. This is a reaction that says, okay, look, the communists are here. They're trying to tell us everything's oppression, and oppression's bad. Give us all the power. We're going to fix the problem with oppression. And then they say, well, actually, guys, the oppression is real, and that's what made our country great. So that's what defined us as a nation. That's what defined us as a people. So now we're going to react, and we're going to say, yeah, that we're going to keep the oppression hierarchy. And I think it's the same exact mistake. But was it spurred on by the woke left? Absolutely. Now, this is the tinfoil hat part of this conversation, because, which we're still on that one question, because I do not believe this is happening primarily as an organic response. I do not think that the woke left got mad and then a bunch of white people got mad and decided that they're going to overreact. I think that much like a lot of operations that take place, whether it's, going to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer or whatever, you have a couple of lunatics. And then you end up with some feds coming in and mixing in with them and encouraging them. And I'm not saying the feds are pushing woke right. I'm saying that people with money are pushing woke right, as a matter of fact. So you get some of these guys start running their mouths about America is for heritage Americans or whatever. CJ Engel is a name attached to that word. So I'm not just pulling that one out of my ear. heritage Americans are the true inheritors of America. We don't need all these, as he phrased them, dots coming into our country, talking about the Indians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that hard to find lunatics or what we might call small fires and pour gasoline on them in the form of funding, right? If you're an eccentric billionaire who wants to create political upheaval, it's not hard to pour money into that. So the tinfoil hat part of the conversation is, I think that it was actually accelerated primarily by funders who wanted to see the conflict escalate and escalate quickly. You have fires lit by the woke left and fires that are burning in kind of yahoos, reactionary yahoos, and then you start putting money into it. And money, of course, is going to attract more people, and the incentives get all off, and that grows the movement. And I think that that's actually how it got to be where it is. Now, how prevalent is it? I certainly have run into them in the wild, and I've been running in them in the wild for the last 4 years. Actually, it's not like this is just this, very recent phenomenon that I had out a few weeks ago that I told you about already. I mean, the first time I encountered one of these kind of lunatics in the wild was I've talked about it, and everybody's mad at me. They're like, James, who is it? Name the name, or it's fake. I was at a conference. It was hosted by the Claremont Institute. It was not the guy on the stage, but there was some little short. I don't know the guy's name. I didn't know his name then. I don't know his name now, but I can tell you he's a little short guy that's about 30. So whoever the little short guy that's about 30 that played a lot of video games is, it's him. And he starts running his mouth about all this, like, we're going to take over and all this kind of crap. And we're going to force convert people and all this nonsense. And I was like, bro, you're starting to sound a little bit like Hitler. And he replies to me, well, Hitler knew how to get rid of communists. And I said, well, this isn't a good turn in a conversation at all. And, he said a number of other alarming things, and a few other people said some alarming things, kind of in this like far right, alt right space. And by the way, that's another definition for you, Charles. What's the woke right? Well, the left ruined the term alt right that we used to use for these people in 2015. So we just had to change the word because that word died, right? The same alt right that was a real thing in 2015. Is back and filled with angrier young people and a lot of evangelical Christians who are beating their chests and trying to pretend that they're Catholics or something. And I don't mean that literally. I mean that they're acting like integralists, which is a Catholic political philosophy. So how prevalent is it? They exist. They're out there. I don't think that in certain circles they're actually that small. I visited a number of churches in the evangelical universe out in Idaho. I talked with 28 pastors at a meeting with 28 pastors, and they said that these Groyper, Nick Fuentes guys, and some of the other Christian nationalist entities or affiliations are their number one issue in the region for their churches. Number one issue dealing with Republican Party county and regional level stuff. No longer the woke left. It's this woke right stuff. So regionally, there's problems. A lot of my buddies go to different churches and say effectively every man under 40 has gone this way. And you can't even talk to them. It's like they're in a cult. So they're out there. I don't think they're a majority. I don't think that they're in huge numbers. They're famously there's some real estate scam tied up in their whole program that they're running. So they're trying to buy all this property outside of Jackson, Tennessee. The Jackson Tennesseans have figured this out, and they're not, I don't know if they're called Jacksonians or Jacksonites, but they figured this out. They're not that happy. And now it's all in the news that they're trying to like build an intentional community of like-minded whatevers outside of Jackson, Tennessee, where Will get this immediately. I don't know if you two city slickers are going to get it, but what we call those people are outsiders. And the outsiders are trying to come in and take over Jackson, and they're not happy about it. So there's these conflicts. There's pockets of this. Now, I had an interesting conversation. I put this on Twitter today, so I can make it, I guess, public here too. An interesting conversation a couple weeks ago when I was out and about in high places with a guy that turns out to be on Trump's team right now, like the team to install Trump's administration in the White House. And he said, these guys are all trying to get into our administration, and we've been trying to figure out who they are to keep them out. And he was thanking me that my hoax and my work on this issue has helped them draw lines around these guys, which I'm sure they're not happy that I've actually boxed them out of power. But I said, well, how many of them are trying to? He said, they're all over the place, hundreds of them trying to get into the administration. And so, That's a not trivial concern. You don't need that many people if you're taking over an institution. And if they work like the woke left, to hire one means to hire 10 because they're going to use their authority, any authority they have, to get all their friends hired as fast as they can because that's how infiltrative cells work. Now, ultimately, I don't think that they're a powerful element, except, or I didn't until I did this stupid hoax where I wrote them 6 pages of the Communist Manifesto turned into New Christian Right Manifesto, and sent it off to American Reformer, which published it. Timon Klein is the editor that accepted it, if I'm not mistaken. And so it gets accepted and published at the American Reformer, New Christian Right, whatever, woke right Christianity light or something publication. And the conservative movement, kind of in this single maneuver, turned on me. Like, I don't want to have like some betrayal narrative, but they did not think it was as cool as I thought some people might think it was. It was a lot less well received than I thought, which means that given the large number of messages that I got that were to the effect of "Thank you for doing this. I agree with you, but I can't say anything because I'm scared." I feel like they have a bigger grip on mainstream conservative MAGA politics than we want to admit, even given that they're a fairly small entity. Then that also suggests it's possible that there's money tied up in not rocking those boats because people know where their bread gets buttered a lot of times. So I think that they are a small phenomenon, relatively speaking. They're a very dedicated phenomenon. They have some degree of terror power over the conservative movement. Certainly, the Groypers are a well-established group of, I would guess, at least dozens of basement dwellers with 50 to 60 accounts each, sock puppet accounts each. I don't know how many they have, but they're the Antifa of this movement. Like when Antifa actually gets arrested in some city, and you get this like mugshot sheet of all these super weirdo looking, like meth head looking dudes. That's the Groypers. They're the equivalent of this. They're the cheap red guard or whatever, and they are. I mean, they're a force. They're kind of legion, at least on the internet and at their weird little convention that they have outside of Turning Point conventions when they do that. But I think that their purpose is to create enough of an image that mainstream conservative politics is kind of lurching in this way to discredit and break apart the coalition that's elected Trump, and that it has to figure out how to govern now, has to figure out how to win the midterms so they don't lose their force in 26, and then has the prospect of 28 coming up. And if there's just enough of this nonsense that's not being, spoken up about or excluded or taken care of on the MAGA side, we know how the left operates. We know that this is going to be the story of all of 26, that the MAGA right, Trump's people, they're all a bunch of racists, all a bunch of xenophobes, or all a bunch of this, or all a bunch of that. And I have a feeling you're going to see this like weird, shaky Maha plus Elon Stan plus MAGA plus whatever coalition just start to fracture. So I'm not that concerned about whether or not they're big or small, because the footprint is more important than the actual size and numbers of the movement itself. But if you ask me for a number of how many of them I think there are, I would say in the tens of thousands. It's not a trivial phenomenon.
Right. And Christy, I want to hear from you in a minute, but I got to say something you said that made me think that that's maybe another way you can use to help people understand the link between the two sides. You were describing the hoax article, the evangelical, some of the Christian nationalists. And what I was thinking, like some of them might just be hardcore and agree down the line, boom, 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 with all this stuff. But I would guess that for most of them, they fall into the similar phenomenon with those pushing those beliefs, as many people, not the white liberals, but many of the black people did at the height of BLM. So if you separated it and just said, what do you think about these things? They didn't really, they weren't, I mean, up until, George Floyd died and people started pouring money in it, the average black person was like, I mean, I don't know, I've heard of it, but I'm not paying attention to it. Will and I constantly joked at the height of this, how if you see, what was the sign called, Will? If you saw the
if you see one of those Black Lives Matter
yeah, he
signs,
has the
like
whole,
in
you
this
know the
house,
person was white. You
no one is
never saw it in
illegal.
the black
Yeah.
community. right? So, but they
It's the
said,
white-owned business sign.
right. So it's interesting. I would talk to
That's
my
really
middle
funny,
class
actually.
friends, right? Exactly. And I would talk about issues down the line, and they had very few that matched with what BLM was pushing, right? In fact, most of them were antithetical, right? They were Christian and, they were, against the LGBT community and pushing out on face, even though but they were leading with that. They were, capitalists and they were successful, but they had just enough of belief in the systemic racism that there was a hook.
Hmm.
And I see there's kind of a parallel in this movement in the sense that, and that's why the evangelicals, you can tell me if I'm wrong, are probably having such a problem with it. It's because, yeah, I may not agree with all that. I may not say deport all the immigrants, whether they're legal or not. I don't buy on the racist, uh, ethno arguments that they push, but I do like every once in a while they'll say something crazy and racist, and then they'll throw some traditionalism out there. They'll say something about traditional roles. They'll say that people that they're proponents of marriage or whatever the case may be, or they claim to be Christian or whatever the case. There's just enough out there that they say, well, compared to whatever everything else I hear, this
Yeah.
seems to speak to me, and they somehow ignore everything else that happens. So is
Yeah,
that
or
a
nationalism.
similarity between what, the people who might be inclined to move that way that don't start up as woke right, but end up in those circles, and the people who end up in the BLM rally, but they were like, well, I wasn't really down with them anyway.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, I don't think it's helpful in most cases, by the way, to call a person woke right. Right. So is so and so woke right? Well, I don't know. Woke right, you can have, or woke left. It doesn't matter. You can be a little bit woke. You can be a whole lot woke. And those are not the same thing. Right.
Right.
And one of the vectors, by the way, that you were talking around, one that they will pull people in like that is nationalism. Right. So that's a
Right.
good example because it's like, oh, I love my country. I'm a nationalist. But then you start digging into it. Well, what do we mean by a nation? Well, a nation's a people in a place with a common language and a common history and a common trajectory. Oh, well, so it's a people. Who are those people, right? And is the new Indian H-1B visa guy, is he an American? Are you an American? Well, if the H-1B visa guy gets a citizenship after he works here 10 years on some visas, is he an American? And that's where you start getting these terms like heritage American floating around.
Mhm.
And I asked a guy the other day who was talking about that, I was like, well, who are the real Americans, right? And this is just some inconsequential, like nobody on Twitter. It's not like a big deal, but he's like, people whose families have been here and they built this country for however many generations back, two, three generations. And I started calculating like how many generations back his family probably goes, is exactly the same as that number. But
Hmm.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? But it's like there's a sliding scale of what you mean by nationalism. They've even got a
Mhm.
phrase like Black Lives Matter that works the same way, right? So this is a popular phrase that was going on during that insane Christmas Day debate on H-1B visas that none of us knew we were going to have or understand why we had yet. And so the phrase was, and this is, I got in trouble because I said this works just like the phrase Black Lives Matter. And the phrase was, America is for Americans first. This is what the research literature on cults calls a thought terminating cliche because you hear it and your brain shuts off because the reason is that it's got a banal meaning that everybody has to agree with. What are you going to say? No, America's for everybody. Like nobody's going to say that, right?
Right.
But that's what they're accusing me of saying.
Right.
But you can't argue with it. You can't deny it. Just like you can't say, well, I don't think Black Lives Matter, right? Because you've missed something important when you do that.
Mhm.
But it's also a truism in the sense it's banal. Nobody needs to say something this freaking obvious, right?
Right.
That's like the whole point. So then that suggests there might be another meaning underneath, right? Which is, well, who counts as Americans, right? America is for Americans first. Does that mean white Americans? Does that mean heritage Americans? Does that mean, non-immigrant families, however many generations back Americans?
Right.
Shi Van Fleet comes over from China, escapes communism, fighting like hell for our country. Does she count? Probably not. These are real questions that don't have good answers. And that phrase, what are you going to say? It's like if somebody said, do you think Black Lives Matter? I'm like, yes, but you're also signing on to more
To a
than
bunch
the
of stuff.
question obviously is asking. And here is, well, do you think America is for Americans first? And you feel the seedy aspect of that, right? So they even got that kind of thought terminating cliche question to trap people into agreeing with them, pull them. This is the process of pulling people in to that kind of cult thing because you've said it now. And then you got some Yahoo over here in your mentions saying, well, the only Americans who count are white. And now you've said it. And so now you've got to like agree with them kind of and like
Right.
backpedal. And so
Suckers. Mhm.
this is a radicalization ladder. And when you start going back to my hypothesis that this is not organically grown, this is heavily fertilized. This is provable, by the way, and I'm sure that proof of this will come out. There are well, I know what's happening. I had a Chinese bot pushing this stuff with me that I caught. This has bot networks behind it, inflaming it and pushing it, which means there's somebody putting money into this objective. When that kind of thing's going on, you have to understand that the people doing it understand radicalization ladders. They know how to take people from A to B all the way down to, P or Q or Z and get them, some small percentage of them. How many people got sucked all the way in on Black Lives Matter to the point where they're out like looting a Target because looting is somehow, the voice of the
Reparations.
oppressed or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
if
that
I can
many,
jump in
but
there,
not
if I can
zero.
jump in there for 1 second, actually, I think an important point that James just made is that a lot of this stuff, especially on social media, isn't coming from the United States.
Yeah,
So, like,
China.
I've actually adopted a policy where I generally don't respond to just pure bots, like Roman statue, 4 followers, like strong opinions on fascist politics or communism or feminism, like it's an immediate block. Because my opinion is that that's someone in Bosnian intelligence or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that even when you look at these larger accounts, and I'll give like 3 examples and then like, move back to the conversation, but like Ian Miles Chong, I have no personal beef with the dude,
He's not
but
here, right?
it's become widely known over the past year that he lives in Malaysia. And I think he lives in like downtown Kuala Lumpur. Like he lives in the economic center of another major country. So there's a question of like, for him, it might just be money, but why are you posting these stories on like Black American crime? What's the possible pitch handle of that for you? What's the crime rate in Malaysia, bro? I mean, like there are a lot of questions that come to mind. But a bunch of them, like Garbage Human, this is another account where like every day it's like the blacks are doing this, but also the whites are screwing up. This is the percentage of single moms. This is everyone's at each other's throats. Trans people. He's Australian, and I think he's a Lebanese Australian. Like he revealed that during one of our arguments when I said like something about, well, where are you from? How long have you been in this country? And he said, well, I live in Brisbane, jackass, or something along those lines. And you realize again that this person, well, perhaps you won that exchange, but like you're not from this country. There's no reason for this to be going on. Who's the other one? Radio Genoa was another one that
Yeah.
got exposed recently for apparently hitting on people, sending along some pictures. But the person who runs the largest European or one of the top 5 sort of white nationalist networks is a bisexual Cambodian guy. So, I mean, some of these people are probably just hustlers.
They make
And
the
other
best
maybe,
white nationalists, Will. Everyone knows that.
yeah, they're
You
foreigners
got
doing the dirty
multiracial
jobs, and
whiteness,
Americans
guys.
are too lazy to come in. And
Right.
but I mean, like, they have intelligence agencies in these countries, like in the South Asian powers, Malaysia and Cambodia. So I mean, like at some point, like somebody is getting paid. Like it would be extremely weird if you saw like an American white IQ 130 guy in a Tennessee condo that was all day just posting about Saudi politics. And the question would be, I mean, immediately, like, well, what defense intelligence agency is this guy working with? Like, what's his salary? It would not be something that you would perceive as organic. So whether that's for financial reasons or there's something deeper going on there, it is interesting. Another one, last one, Lizzie, I think the name. I actually view this person as kind of funny, but is also Australian and non-white. Like if you go through most of the major alt accounts, like they're not legacy heritage American. So, and it's just again the ramp up of tension in the USA is beneficial to a lot of people. That was also true with BLM, by the way. Like there
That's
are
right.
substantial amounts of like Qatari money and so on that have been tracked flowing into these movements, and that's completely unsurprising. If you're fighting a multiracial democracy, if you can make them all hate each other over there and bash each other over the head with sticks, well, then you're ahead of the game, and you can focus on developing, wind power and nuke over in China or India or whatever. So worth keeping in
Well,
mind.
I'd like to hear
Right.
what Christy has to say, and then
Yeah,
I
I
want to
have a
talk
comment on
immigration.
my face, right? I have a
Then
comment. So
I got to talk immigration. Then we got
I
to talk
did
immigration.
I did have 2 total like aha moments. Oh, hi. It's so funny. I had
Oh,
2
Thomas Sowell is here.
aha
Next
moments when you
question
were
to yeah, Professor Sowell. Go ahead.
seriously, when you were talking, James. So Milo was invited during the weekend of AmFest by the Arizona Young Republicans to be a speaker at their event. not related to AmFest, an outside event, Arizona Young Republicans. So I'm just watching this exchange back and forth. And so the brouhaha started. He has 99 problems. Why are you guys inviting him? So they disinvited him. And I kid you not, by the end of that day, they were apologizing to him and re-inviting him to be a speaker at their conference. And I'm like, what is going on? And no, my teenage daughter, when she ages out of the teenage Republicans, will not be joining the young Republicans because what are you guys doing, right? So the thing that you said about terror power is absolutely true because there is a set that is so afraid of these grouper guys and their network and their loud voices that they're like, fine, just come speak. Just don't dox us and don't blow us up on the internet and don't cause us problems. Speak, have at it. So that was one thing that made sense to me as you were talking. Another thing is, so I had initially only heard, because you don't show up on my feed all the time. So I had initially only heard of woke right from Hotep Jesus or Jeff Charles. And it can easily be dismissed as, oh, they're just black guys standing up for black people, right? Because anytime that we're like, no, it's not DEI or it's not this, is not that. You guys are overreacting. You guys are whatever. It's just like, oh, shut up. You're black. You're agreeing with black people because, why? But with you, with woke right, that's a real problem. So I see now why they want to cancel you because you being white and you're like, no, like this is this reactionary thing, that you guys are doing as a problem. Now I understand why, James Lindsay is canceled and why I got a million inboxes. Oh, you're doing this, ask him that. Like,
A
oh,
bunch of
I'm not.
salacious stuff, I bet too.
Oh, a bunch.
Yeah, it's real and it's fabulous. Oh my God. Yeah, so yeah, as it turns out, having fallen on the foul side of that network, of the Docs network and everything, and they've done that to me this past few weeks. I understand in a sense why people are afraid to do it. I don't want to say like it's bothered me all that much. It hasn't. And it turns out that I have friends that they really shouldn't have doxed me. They just really shouldn't have. Enjoy that later, guys, if you're watching. But as it turns out, you're worried about the FBI. That's so funny. Um, anyway, I digress. Yeah, it's not pleasant to get doxxed in certain ways. I had to go work with law enforcement. I had to, wonder if something's going to go on. Um, I mean, it turns out all these guys are exactly what you would expect they are. They're like generic low life dudes or douchebag teenagers with nothing better to do. I won't talk about how I know who they all are. Um, I'm having a little bit too much fun with that. Sorry. So I understand the terror network thing with people, but the thing is, back in the day when the woke left went bananas, we had this conversation. And the conversation was, it's scary because people are being silent. The fewer people who are being silent, the less power that has. Go ahead, cancel me, right? Like I even put the stupid Obi-Wan gif up on there today. You knock me down, I'll be more powerful or whatever. And like, fine, whatever. Cancel me. You're just proving my point, right? When people start speaking up about this, it loses all of its power. When people start being honest about it, it loses all of its power. They can go ahead and try to dox lots and lots and lots of people, and it's not really going to work out for them that well. And if they're kowtowing down to invite Milo because they're afraid he's going to unleash their stuff on them for doing that, then it just goes to show you that they're behaving exactly in the manner that I'm describing. That they're acting using woke tactics. They're digging up people's pasts. They're digging up people's workplaces and they're doxing them. This is the kind of stuff the left did back in 2020. Oh man, somebody went out in the park and a racist thing happened or something. Like, let's make sure that we run this lady out of the city, right? You remember the dog when the bird guy and right before George Floyd died? You guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't it?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so this lady's out walking her dog or whatever, and he's like watching his
in
birds
New
and
York.
they have an altercation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's New York.
Yep.
Yeah, Central Park, right? And so they run this lady like legit, like run her out of the city over this, right? This is the kind of stuff. And was it Senator, what was it? Al Franken? Is that him? Is that the
Oh, yeah,
comedian?
in Minnesota. Yep.
Yeah, Minnesota. So, they decided he didn't like something he said, so went and found a picture of him being a comedian on a comedian SNL set, like either grabbing somebody's boob or pretending to or whatever, having fun on set, being goofy. Probably they were drunk, they're on TV. And so, you know, being a fool, and he's crying on TV, he's got to quit his job. These are the same tactics these guys are doing. There's the same tactics these guys are doing, right? And then, like you said, you get this weird underbelly of stuff that you're never more than 2 inches away from, like hating Jews and blaming things on racism, and
Right,
everything that I don't like is DEI.
right.
Um, something something bad is going on there, and it just gets worse until people speak up and until people do things.
Now, I know that we could talk about a bunch of them. Apology to my Jewish friends because I could bring that one up too. That's a good point. There's a lot of back and forth in there in the racism, but I want to talk about, I think we'll end on that because it's probably going to take 15 minutes or so to get to that. I want to talk about the immigration thing because that has just been so insane. No one expected that turn, how that the shift turned so quickly. So immigration and H-1Bs and all that whole nonsense that you alluded to earlier about Christmas Day. But I want to get to that by testing Wilfred's memory. So we had really three, but I'll say two guests on where these topics kind of came
Okay.
up. And
Okay.
you think about it, but and at the time, it was funny because one what we did kind of push back on one, but when the other one was saying we got a lot of pushback about with the belief that it meant one thing, and I was like, that's not true. But now when we fast forward, now it's like, but you could say, and they are Denise Long and Tucker Carlson. So Denise
Okay.
is a black woman who's very pro-black, but conservative leaning. She calls herself a radical Republican, right?
Okay.
So I like having her on because she's very left on some things and very right on other things. So when everybody was at the height of the whole left, right, and left, right, I was the one saying, well, you can't put people in those boxes because it's more nuanced than that. They could be very left on one issue, not a. And here's an example. But her views on immigration, were you on with her one time, Chrissy? You were on
Yeah.
one. Her views are pretty much, it's kind of like a racist saying, I'm not racist against blacks. I just don't want them around. I don't want them to marry my kids. I don't want them in the country. And I don't want them. She's like, we need to stop all immigration. She was open back when everybody else was only talking about illegal immigration. She's like, no, we need to limit immigration. She's traveling around with Roy Beck. She's talking about, Numbers USA, the whole nine thing. And the Tucker thing was when Tucker was on, and he talked about, just like you said, he talked about what is a nation, right? If you're going to be a nationalist, what is a nation? And and what he said wasn't problematic. And I defended him because when people said it, it was like what he said was racist, which is just flat out stupid because he clearly verbalized that Black Americans are being hurt by illegal immigration, and I'm counting them too. He's like, and he talks about, he gives examples of Black people that he's talked to and all this other stuff. So they made the mistake of saying when he says America, he means white people at the exclusion of Black people. And I'm like, no, I don't think I took it that way. It's pretty clear that's not what he meant. But now when you say, a language and a culture and one people, right? And you talk about when the people saying that today, the nationalists, do they mean everybody? Do they mean the immigrants? Then you can say, oh, I wonder if he meant that, right? If he was saying that some people who immigrate here don't. Now, assimilation is different. Obviously, if you move here and you're antagonistic to the culture of the place you move, yes, that's a problem. But these people are saying, I'm not saying Tucker's saying that, but you could question that. But these people are saying, even if you move here, you assimilate, you live in the way that the culture of America, and you buy into that. You're waving the flag and the whole nine. You're still not one of us. You're no longer American. I don't. Who was it? Well, we got into a debate about with somebody about that. They were like, "I'm like you. If once you take that citizen and you pass, and they swear you in that day, you're as much American as anybody else. Stop telling me how many years." Denise was openly saying lineage. The thing you're talking about there, she was openly saying lineage. Her Twitter, if you go to her Twitter thing, it says ninth generation American. Right? She said we need to drop the race and black and white, and we need to look at lineage. So I know people look at it that way. So when I heard the people talking about this immigration debate and how they went from we need to root out all the illegal immigration to saying, well, some of those people shouldn't be here and they're taking the jobs in the H-1Bs, I wasn't surprised by it. I was just surprised by how far it went in the comments of how extreme everyone gets, right? So why do you think, I'm sure you weren't surprised by it, but why do you think that so many people on on a dime shifted from their narrative on, look at the border, we have to stop these people, they're just coming in and changing the nation, to, well, I don't know if we need, people coming in from India and Australia and the Middle East and all that. So we got perfect, it's hurting the people here. Now Johnny down the street can't get a job because somebody came here from India.
Well,
Are you asking? You want me to? I want to hear Will's
Yeah,
answer
let's
first.
let
yeah,
Will go first.
I'll go. Okay, yes. I mean, we'll all get to talk, but yeah, basically, I mean, I think the answer is pretty. So the answer is pretty obvious. People are amoral predators that tend to support things that advantage them. And when I say stuff like that, people are always like, "Just shut up, bro. You're not sitting on some trading floor right now." But it's absolutely true. Like when you ask, why do feminists in general support most of the male things that went along with marriage, absolute commitment, and men funding, dating, and all that, but then have real problems when you come to female expectations from sex to domesticity to so on. The answer really, and I think there's some ethical points on the women's side, but the answer is, well, because the first block of things hurt men and the second block of things hurt women. I mean, it really is that simple. Like, it's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Why do Black people support affirmative action? Well, three of us are in the Black business class because it helps us get even better jobs. I actually don't support affirmative action. I feel like we're all pretty competitive as it is. But that, if you ask average Black businessman, like, I mean, his response would be like, well, it's probably wrong, but as long as they have legacies, I want mine. My kid wants to be a dentist, or fuck you. And I think that basic element of human nature is something that's not even bad, but it's something you have to train, you have to regulate, you have to direct it so people support and protect their families rather than acting like wolf, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, obviously, white Americans, and in fact, legacy Black Americans, so on, have some issues with mass immigration. I mean, we've seen the country go from being 85% Caucasian, 12% African American to whatever it is now. I mean, it's 58% white, I believe, 19% recently arrived Hispanic. If you're throwing in Southeast Asians and so on, almost 11% Asian. These are mostly good people, but a lot of people are looking at that and saying, well, I mean, it looks a lot like Bangalore or Riyadh when I go to certain cities, like Vancouver and party. I mean, I've like, some of my friends still coach. Like, you go up near Detroit to Dearborn, Michigan, or something like that. I mean, it is interesting.
Mhm.
It's very much like being in another civilized society. People are perfectly nice. They welcome you in for coffee, nice businesses, but signs are in Arabic. People are speaking a variety of languages. Women are walking around with hijabs on. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised to see that kind of breakthrough. I do think that if you're on the sane, right, the focus has to be illegal immigration. If you look at, I mean, so we can have disputes with these new immigrants like we did with Italians and Irishmen and Black West Indians, but I mean, they are mostly pretty good guys. Two, the total number of people coming in via H-1B, including spouses last year, was like 127,000. Under Joe Biden, 12 million illegal aliens just walked into the country. So these kind of upper middle class disputes where we're focusing on people that are entering job sectors we might be in, we're discussing whether 75% of the usual tech exec salary is indentured servitude. I mean, I think they're silly distractions. Trump last time didn't build the wall. I mean, he built 737 miles of additional one-strand border fencing. So the thing with immigration is actually E-Verify plus something down there at the border. But anyway, like getting to the point, it's not a surprise to me that people said, well, we didn't mean illegal immigrants. We meant immigrants. Just like, Martin Luther King for 15 years of his life, the great man said, all I want is color blindness. And we passed the color blindness bill. And then King said, well, we're still lagging a little
We
bit.
get some jobs.
Him and Johnson have both given versions of hobbled runners, right? The famous speech, like, maybe we need a hand up. So it's very hard to restrain that urge when you're competing. And that I think is just the root of this.
I mean, maybe they should have some babies then. I mean, we're not as bad as some of the other part of the world, but you want your country to survive, you got to have more people born than die.
Absolutely. And just as a quick follow up, I mean, this is every time I talk to like a young white guy who's like, how can I compete with you guys in the black elite? And then all these Asians coming over here, and then all these Mexicans walking across the border. And then, and one of my responses is always, well, marry a blonde and have 6 kids. Like, if you're really on this sort of racial identitarian tip, if you really, I mean, you live in Iowa, I'm from the Midwest, Kentucky, if you're really about this sort of thing, like supporting your community, if you have some sense of racial identification, do you have a girlfriend? Everyone almost always says yes, even today. Do you have a kid? It's like 50%. Yeah. Are you married? And that's where the white guys as well as the black ones start just ending the conversation and logging off. But I mean, like, if you want to make these decisions that would enable you to go forward and compete functionally, they're quite easy to do. Have babies, graduate from college. Like, the thing that people got so mad at Vivek Ramaswamy for was something, ironically, that people on the right have been saying for years. Like, education in white and black American heartland schools is very bad. And a lot of the people that get out of white and black heartland schools are stupid and are not actually going to become computer techs or IT managers. And it sucks to say that, but when some guy comes in and says, well, I'm going to hire an Indian engineer if this is what you're producing, you can't just respond to that by throwing fruit. You have to, improve the schools while we're working on H-1B.
Were they upset at that, or were they more upset about him saying that, well, you all are more, you celebrate and honor the athlete more than the smart kid?
It's all just true. I mean, now I will say the past 5 years, we're kind of past 5 or 10 years with sort of the focus on not even
He's like, but they
nerd
do.
Yeah, but it's like we've kind of pulled back from that with the last decade of like body positivity and failure is wonderful and so on. But in general, yeah, like if you were to go to a typical American school in the 1990s and say these kids are focused more on getting laid, drinking beer, and playing football than they are on, working with this new invention, the computer, I think everyone would just have said, well, yeah, that's accurate. So there is a bit of denial. You're seeing the same. This is something James said earlier. You're seeing the same thing from white guys now that you've seen from black guys when these points are made. So like
Equity.
all these white
Yeah.
nationalist guys want to talk about IQ all the time and walk around with these fucking digital metrics in their back pocket. Like this came up during the Jared Taylor, Richard Hanania debate. Like the average black IQ in the USA right now tested is 91. In West Virginia and some of these Appalachian states is 92. So if you're really going to bring this up, white conservative Americans aren't leading the world when it comes to like these mental health metrics at all. They're doing as well as Hispanics or middle class black people are, if that. So if you're going to make this your focus, like you can't then say, well, we need affirmative action, get those Asian guys out of the market so that it's just us and the other races. I mean, like it's ridiculous. And I think the reaction to it is this should be the same.
James Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm going to the tinfoil hat. I think
Uh-oh.
it was fake. I said it was fake within an hour of me seeing it, probably within 15 minutes of me seeing it. I said, this is fake. This right here is what you call a psychological operation that's meant to tear MAGA apart. We've all been walking together, and there's a fracture line here about legal versus illegal. And I was like, my brother in Christ, it is Christmas Day. Why is this happening on Christmas Day at the time of day when we're all sitting down? We've had dinner with our families or whatever it is. Somebody's going to put on some movie that nobody wants to watch because you got to sit around some more and there's going to be drinks and stuff. And so everybody's diddling on their phone. And all of a sudden we're having the H-1B, argument of the century. And I was thinking, this isn't real. It started with influencers. I bet you those influencers got paid to tweet some shit. I don't think it's more like we talk, Will's over here saying, well, I think, the people generally do what advantages them. And I just started grinning. I was like, that's my hypothesis. I think they were doing what advantages them, as in somebody paid them to go start this fight on Christmas.
So do you think Elon got hooked? I mean, that he was tricked into it?
I don't know.
Because he went deep in. He was like,
hard ones.
Screw you, racist.
Like Vivek poured like whether what he said is true or not, he poured it was like it's the first kind of political misstep I've ever seen out of the guy, right? Like he usually can walk right in and grease the whole conversation up and everybody's happy, like, wow, that guy's smart. He took all the heat out of everything. Everybody's shaking hands and smiling and feels great. Then this one, it was like, I mean, he became like I saw a meme of him from the woke right where they turned him into a Jew, and so you could tell they were mad. And they put the hat and they put the curls and the whole thing, and I'm like, okie dokie. But then Elon did the weirdest thing I think I've ever seen. He basically comes in and then, says that everybody's stupid. And then he goes a step further and he says that you can, go F yourself in the face if you disagree with me or whatever.
If some of you MAGA people are racist, I'm going to root you out.
And then Yeah, but what gets lost is in the middle of all this, you have this all these influencers all of a sudden lost their blue check marks and they're
Yep.
like censorship and they're screaming, right? But they didn't lose their blue check marks for saying their opinions. They lost their blue check marks for being identified as being in a network of influencers who brought the issue to bear in an inorganic and coordinated fashion
Mm.
that could potentially game the payout system of Twitter. So
Ah.
that's why I'm saying this is fake. And they all got their blue checks back, except I think Laura Loomer within a couple of days. And I think that this was designed to cause maximum tension. Nobody was talking about it. Now, let's be real about the issue. There are issues with H-1B. I have all this criticism. And James just says everybody who wants to be American's American now. And this isn't true. H-1B visas, whether or not I think the system needs to be reformed, but even whether or not it needed to be reformed, it's being gamed by these like weird, you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Charlie Munger's old statement. You got these like farm companies over in India cooking up like ability for dudes to pass like rudimentary coding tests to get visas that aren't qualified for the jobs. The whether it's not cheap labor is a more complicated issue. I talked to a tech leader, like one of these guys that runs one of these corporations that hires these dudes by large numbers. And he's like, that whole discussion's just garbled and wrong. The cheapest thing for me to do is hire all of them down in their office in Sao Paulo for 40 cents on the dollar and never bring them to America in the first place.
Right.
The ones I bring over, I'm paying like, 90 something cents on the dollar as it is at best. Plus, I got immigration fees I have to deal with and paperwork. So he's like, that's all just nonsense. But does this system need to be reformed? Yes. Was Biden abusing it in a system like going beyond its soft cap? Yes. Is that a relevant discussion? So you have all this like stuff that's
Mhm.
relevant to talk about, but instead it's like we don't just want no illegal immigration. We want no immigration is the line that has to just get pushed and pushed and pushed. And I think that this was completely artificial. I think it was a psychological operation launched against MAGA deliberately by bad actors, held up by bot networks, put out by pay to play influencers. And I am extraordinarily suspicious. And I think I've been actually saying for about a year that the conservative movement slash MAGA slash conservative side of politics is not paying attention. Communists infiltrate freaking everything. They have infiltrated you. I guarantee you they've infiltrated our movements as well. And if you're not paying attention to that, then you're a sitting duck. The person who falls for propaganda, you pick your favorite propaganda book, Jacques Ellul, being very, famous for this. Bernays, the person who falls for propaganda is the person who believes they can't fall for propaganda. That is the biggest mark for a propaganda campaign. Oh, well, that's something the left does. And if it comes in a left wing package, we know a psyops when we see it. Patriot Front's a psyops. That's fake. That's feds, right? The second it comes as a big conservative influencer push to talk about something extremely divisive, can't see it. And it just suckered him in. So I'm at maximum, you take cynicism on my stereo knob and turn it up not to 11 but to 13 on this one. I think the whole debate was manufactured and fake with the intention of tearing MAGA apart and scaring off a bunch of people who voted for Trump, who weren't quite sure if they should vote for Trump,
Yeah.
who then saw a whole bunch of people being like, get the dots out of my country.
I'm happy to hear that because I think a lot of these arguments coming up are fake, but I'm still shocked that Elon, he is Twitter. How could he fall for it?
I don't know
But
what Elon's doing.
I guess I said that was gonna be it. But last thing, we'll name some names. Who are the people with the? So we talked earlier about how it's not a small number, but it's not a big number. Some of them are bots, but a lot of them are doing it for influence, clicks, money, whatever the case may be. The more dangerous ones are the ones that are more problematic, are the ones that can get a lot of people to follow them because they're larger accounts. So who are some of the people that would be considered like the leaders of these groups?
Well, I mean, I hoaxed an outfit called American Reformer. So you can go look up who's at American
Right.
Reformer. I sent them Karl Marx's work
Right.
rewritten in their ideology. Not only did they publish it, but after I came out and told them what I did, they put an editor. It's still there on the website. They didn't take it down. It's got an editor's note and says this is a reasonable aggregation of some of our thought. That's on there in black and white at the very top of the article. So they stand by the ideas, right? So, I said Timon Klein earlier. I think that's how you say his name. If it's not, I apologize. I don't mean to mispronounce somebody's name unless it's Kamala. I'll say hers wrong on purpose. But other than that, so you got Timon Klein was an editor. You got Nate Fisher is tied up in that. Joshua Abatoy. That's some names. So this is that new founding group.
Right.
They are tied in with a network of men's clubs that was founded by Charles Haywood that is called the Society for American Civic Renewal,
Is that the guy?
which
There
is
was a guy I think you posted
super
that
weird guy.
yeah, it was like some guy that joined Twitter and then within hours he had like a 500,000 followers.
Oh no, that's Jared Taylor.
Oh, that was okay. That's who it
They
was.
let him back. He came back on, and he was back up to like 50,000 in the first few hours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, no. So Charles Haywood is a big financier. He actually owned the Mansfield King Shampoo Company,
Mm.
and he describes himself as rich beyond the dreams of avarice, and throws a lot of money at a lot of these things, and new founding and what do you call it? The Society for American Civic Renewal are in that. So that's stuff that's like, I think that stuff's important, but that's actually, very inside baseball kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Tucker Carlson's unambiguously pushing this stuff. Candace Owens is unambiguously pushing this stuff.
Mm.
I would say the biggest voice that's kind of pure in the philosophy is R.N. McIntyre at the Blaze is pushing the crap out of this stuff.
Mm.
Whether he's pushing Alistair McIntyre, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Carl Schmidt, he's one of their philosopher guru guys.
Right.
Most, but not all, of the dudes in Britain and the Lotus Eaters are pushing a postmodern traditionalism. That's actually what they call it. They openly claim to be postmodern. You got a guy that wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism named Stephen Wolfe. You've got a former DOD man named William Wolfe that doesn't appear to have any skills at anything except agitation campaigns, who's definitely not supposed to be called a Fed, who goes around and pushes this. He's recently moved to South Carolina to live in the same neighborhood as, or I don't know about the same neighborhood. He lives close enough to go to the same church as the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention, puts out videos of him lifting weights and being his new buddy, hanging out with power, one guy after another. You got a lot of these guys that are in different networks like that, but William Wolfe, Stephen Wolfe, Nate Fisher's kind of big, Charles Haywood, these are characters, Tucker Carlson and Candace. It's we had this conversation a long time ago on the streets of Manhattan, Charles.
Yes.
And he's like, sooner or later, somebody's gonna have to say something about Candace. Well, people are saying something about Candace now. And we all saw with that. The Babylon Bee puts out 2 jokes about Candace Owens, both of which were funny. The second of which was, I guess, I thought the first one was funnier, honestly. But the second one put her into a fit. Like she lost her cool over that. She did not laugh. The no humor was there. The first joke, for the people who haven't seen it, they said Candace Owens shouts out, "It was the Jews" on the first round of Clue, which I thought was really funny. And then the second joke was that Candace Owens is horrified to find out that Christmas started with the birth of a Jew.
Yes.
And she didn't think that was funny.
No.
But yeah, if you want to see like the philosophical gobbledygook, if you're that kind of, that's my bag usually. Aaron McIntyre is pushing that probably harder than anybody.
The guy from the Blaze.
From the Blaze.
So what do we do about all it? I mean, you can't fight this by yourself.
Well, I've been doing okay, but I feel like I put this on Twitter today too. So I feel like, not to put yourself in a high level character in a famous story, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm Gandalf, Lord of the Rings, the Balrog of the woke rights coming across the bridge. And I was like, "You shall not pass," and drove my staff into it, and it falls into the hole. Like everything went really bad for them in the last month, and whoop, they whipped up and they got around my leg and they're pulling me over the edge with them, canceling me. And so I feel like I'm at that scene in the movie, and I don't know that I get this resurrection moment like, this wizard dude in the film. So maybe I'm just done for. But I feel like that's where we're at, right? So we've seen the enemy. We've got to start drawing lines around what it is. We've got to, I think it's just a matter of start talking about it. I don't think these things are popular. I
Right.
think the primary thing that's happening is that people don't believe that it's happening. And, not to discredit where we started with you, Charles, here, but is it too small to matter? Is it even happening? Have you ever met anybody that believes it? And, those are important questions and we've got to hash them out. But we've
Right.
also, it's like, as Will said, you can't go on Twitter right now and not notice that there's some Jew hate. Like it's
Oh, yeah.
sort of, it's like pouring out of the cracks.
Yeah.
Um,
I see all
we're-
the stuff, to be honest, on Twitter. It's just that, like I always say that, but it's not real because of you seeing it from the same
no,
sites, the
Twitter's
same
like
circles of
California,
people.
right? So if they put some woke policy in California, the whole United States is going to have it in a few years,
Yeah.
right? Twitter is like the California of politics.
Right. It just
If
takes
it's
a while.
happening on Twitter, it's going to be happening in some measure in 12 to 18 months through all of kind of movement
That's true,
politics.
because we were talking about the gender issue before everybody else did. I remember being on stage at an event and saying, I think when we were in Boston, I said, "Yeah, everybody's talking about this Black Lives Matter and everything. This gender ideology is going to be the problem. You should start focusing on that." Like, it's not a big deal. And then that became the thing. So
The thing.
that's definitely the way these things, kind of happen. But I hope that more people really, because I think, I mean, not that it's bad, because I think they're wrong and where they mean it, they're whack jobs. But I don't think it matters how big they are in the sense that you just need, it's January 6th all over again. You just need
Yeah.
enough of them to have something that the left can say, see, I said Trump was a fascist, and look at that guy. No one's going to put two and two together and say, but that guy's not Trump. It doesn't matter. If you have
They're,
enough of them
that's right.
doing things,
Yep.
that's an example, and that's what they need.
That's right. And they are literally exactly the thing the left has been saying that conservatives and Trump are. It's like they took the picture. You ever see those things where some dude like is good at graphic design, like draws the realistic animal of some children's drawing and it's hilarious. So
Mhm.
the left is given these like tortured descriptions of what the conservative looks like, the racist, fascist, the whole thing. And these guys have lived up to every caricature so much that it's like they just imported the drawing, right? And they have become the thing that the left, in a sense, summoned them to be. Whatever the left said, this is bad, they said, okay, we're that, and it's good. And what you just said is exactly right. It doesn't really matter how many fine people were on both sides at Charlottesville, and that became not only defining, but allegedly the reason Biden runs for and wins president, right?
Hmm.
You don't need that much because politics is the art of perception more than it is of reality. So if you got these guys and they can get a prominent enough foothold or they can pull off a prominent enough move at some demonstration, some display like J6 or whatever. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be real. It just has to convince the New York Times that it's worth writing about and freaking out about and freaking out the country about, so to speak. It doesn't have to actually be the New York Times. You just got to freak enough people out to where the Democrats run with it and then they can eke out a big electoral win. And then we're in big trouble because Trump's neutered and halfway through he's not going to finish his agenda. Then they're like, Trump didn't even finish his agenda. They love to do that, right? They love to like shadow. They used to do this on Twitter. They would shadow ban you and then you have terrible reach, and then they would come and bully you and say your tweets are so bad nobody engages with them, right? They love to do that kind of thing. And so the same thing will happen. They'll neuter Trump politically through this crap if they can by 26 with the midterm, and then they're going to say Trump couldn't deliver, Trump couldn't deliver, Trump couldn't deliver, and it's a big problem for MAGA and for the possible reemergence of this whole thing we thought we just got a reprieve from.
Right.
So I don't think that the size of the thing matters that much. I think it's more about how you use it. And they're using it maliciously to do whatever it is Elon said you're supposed to do with your face, but to MAGA and the country. And that was artful.
I do think pretty soon we're going to have to stop saying it's just on Twitter. It's just on Twitter. Because
Yeah.
the visa argument, that made the mainstream media, the legacy media, the next day. They were talking about it
Yeah, it
because
was everywhere.
it was so ridiculous that I logged out of X for like a week, like
Yeah.
starting on Christmas. I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this.
I got a bunch
But
of friends who quit X over it.
But I saw it on legacy media. So pretty soon, because legacy media is losing their power, they are looking at X, like Elon says, as the media. So pretty soon, these asinine conversations that we think that's only on X is mainstream.
I
Last
think it's
word
going
to
to be
Yeah,
Will
I
important,
Riley.
think
by the
one thing
way.
that's important to
Go
remember
ahead.
there actually also, like, I mean, we've all agreed like a lot of them are bots, go back to Lithuania, but it's important to remember that half or more of the people on Twitter, certainly on Facebook, are real people that exist. So when people say, well, that's only on Twitter, it's only on Twitter that, you know, women are saying they're going to abort all their male babies was one of my debates that I watched today, or white and black people are combining to say we shouldn't have Jews in this country, or this sort of thing. I mean, at one level, that's true. It's a bunch of people online that are talking in a way they couldn't talk in public at their job. But still, I mentioned the Garbage Human account. I think there are 500,000 followers there who don't seem to much like any of the major races, honestly. And I mean, you have to ask, 200,000 of them maybe are real Americans. What do those 200,000 people do? Like what jobs are they in? Who are they hiring? So it's not just like the people on social media saying this crazy men's rights or feminist or anti-white or anti-black stuff aren't people. It's not like that's not what they actually think. So when you go out into the world, I mean, it's only 5 or 10% of people, but they're unduly influential and they're actually out there.
Yep. As for combating this, though, drawing lines around it and admitting it exists, I think is key. But also, their stuff's already not popular, right? And so they have these hooks like that nationalism kind of radicalization ladder, and the reason that those work and the reason they worked with the left with a lot of the BS that the left pulled on us over the last 10 years is because people just haven't really thought about these questions. I honestly think that there's a vacuum. We always say that nature abhors a vacuum. We talk about, if a leader comes down, there's a vacuum of power and there's a power struggle. There's a vacuum, it's not just of, Christian or religious values or whatever in the country. There's a vacuum of understanding what it means to be American. Like we haven't thought about it a lot. We haven't talked about it a lot. The patriotic kind of content that people my age at least grew up with a little bit waned even while I was still a teenager as something that would be kind of mainstream popular. So kids in their 20s, early 20s in particular right now haven't grown up on patriotic content. What does it mean to be an American? And well, they don't have good answers, but it's not looking too positive. And then you have these dudes come along, these demagogues come along, Twitter demagogues or whatever, giving them a bad answer that takes them to a bad place. As a capitalist at heart, I think it's incumbent upon those of us who have some sense of this to start putting out the positive vision. What do we want? We want freedom. Why do we want freedom? Because well, tyranny's terrible, but that's still a negative answer. Because with freedom, then we have the opportunity to build something, and that what we build can make a difference in the world. And the reason that in capitalism that you make money by providing a good or a service at a good price and et cetera, is because you're producing something that brings value into the world that people are willing to part with their money in a way that both of you increase. So we need to have those conversations that sound an awful lot like the Reagan era in a way again, and talk about why freedom matters, why American values matter, why the American dream is, worth holding on to and aspiring to. Because I just had a conversation a few minutes, an hour before I got on this show with you guys, with Nate Fisher, who I mentioned. I had put out a thing saying exactly what we're talking about, influence networks and bots on social media, and just wait until I said, when you guys see the truth, because I know a little bit of what's going on behind the curtain with that. When you see the truth of how much of this stuff's out there, how bad social media is for influence campaigns and bot networks and so on, people are going to be shocked at how manipulated they're being on social media. And I said that, and he says, well, if Americans are so easily manipulated, or if people are so easily manipulated, Nate Fisher says, maybe we should consider whether or not the American system even works anymore. Right? And we better start having answers to that. We can't just take for granted that like USA because, America F yeah. We're going to have to start having real answers because people are asking critical, I don't mean in a good way, I mean critical theory style questions to undermine our beliefs in the things that we've been allowing ourselves to take for granted. And I think it's going to matter a lot.
Well, I think we will end it there. He is James Lindsay, the woke slayer, both left and right. James, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys again.
I got a country to say, God bless. as the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.